Hello. Hello. Welcome. Settle in close, make yourself comfortable. Tonight I want to share a story with you. A story of loss, of longing, and perhaps of something more. It's a story that has lived in the quiet corners of my mind for a long time, and I feel compelled to share it with you now. This is the story of Alara. Alara lived in a small seaside town where the gray waves kissed the shore with a constant, whispering sigh. The air there always smelled of salt and distant rain, a scent that clung to your clothes and hair, a constant reminder of the ocean's presence. Alara loved the sea. It was her confidant, her solace. She would spend hours walking along the beach, collecting smooth, gray stones and listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves. But Alara carried a deep sadness within her. Her husband, Liam, a fisherman, had been lost at sea a year prior. His boat, a small, brightly painted vessel named the Wanderer, had been caught in a sudden violent storm. No wreckage was ever found. No body recovered. Just an empty space where he used to be. Every day, Alara would walk to the edge of the cliffs, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon. She would whisper his name into the wind, hoping, praying that somehow he would hear her. She kept his old fishing jacket, the one that smelled faintly of the sea and his familiar cologne, hanging on the back of their bedroom door. At night, she would hold it close, imagining his arms around her, the warmth of his embrace. Time passed as it always does, relentless and unforgiving. The seasons changed, the leaves fell, and the snow blanketed the town in a hushed silence. Yet, Alara's grief remained, a constant ache in her heart. She continued her daily ritual, walking to the cliffs, whispering his name. One day, as she stood there, a strange thing happened. A single seagull landed on the rocks beside her. It wasn't unusual to see seagulls there, of course, but this one had a small, silver ring caught around its leg. Alara knelt down, gently coaxing the bird closer. As she carefully removed the ring, she noticed an inscription on it. L.E. Liam and Alara. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest. Could it be? Could it possibly be Liam's ring? The ring she had given him on their wedding day. Overwhelmed with emotion, Alara returned home. She carefully placed the ring in a small wooden box, alongside other mementos of Liam. She spent the rest of the day lost in memories, both happy and sad. Weeks turned into months. Alara continued her walks, but now there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. The ring, a tangible piece of Liam, had given her a sense of closure, a feeling that he hadn't simply vanished into thin air. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Alara stood on the cliffs once more. She held the silver ring in her hand, feeling its smooth surface against her skin. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I miss you, Liam." And then she heard it, a faint but distinct sound, a familiar melody, a song Liam used to sing to her, a sea shanty about a sailor returning home. The sound seemed to come from the sea itself, carried on the gentle breeze. Alara opened her eyes, her heart pounding. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of a boat, but there was nothing. Just the vast, endless ocean. But then, she looked down. At her feet, there, nestled amongst the rocks, was a small wooden carving. A carving of a seagull, with a tiny silver ring around its leg. It was identical to the one she had removed from the real seagull weeks before. And then she understood. Liam hadn't returned from the sea. He had become part of it. The seagull, the ring, the song. weren't messages from beyond. They were echoes of her own grief, manifestations of her longing, created by her own subconscious mind. The storm hadn't just taken Liam. It had taken a part of her too, a part that was now trying to heal itself in the only way it knew how. Alara smiled, a sad but accepting smile. She picked up the wooden carving, clutching it tightly in her hand. She knew that Liam was gone, but she also knew that a part of him would always be with her, in her memories, in the sea, and in the echoes of her own heart. And that is the story of Alara. I hope you found some comfort in it. It's a reminder that even in the deepest sorrow, there is always a glimmer of hope, a whisper of love that never truly fades away. Good night. Sleep well in a quiet corner of Elmwood, where the oak trees bow in perpetual sorrow and the air feels heavy with unspoken words, stands an abandoned house. Its windows, once vibrant eyes to the world, are now glazed with dust and whispers of forgotten time. A single lantern flickers outside, casting shadows that dance like ghosts across the peeling paint. This is not just a house. It is a mausoleum for stories left untold. Tonight, I want to tell you about Eleanor. She was a woman whose life was woven from the threads of longing and loss, a soul who lived between the pages of her own unfinished book. They say the house belongs to her, or perhaps she belongs to the house. Eleanor came to Elmwood when she was barely 20, her arms full of books and her heart full of dreams. She was a writer, or so she told herself, though she had never written a single word she believed worthy. She rented the house on the edge of the woods, drawn to its quiet isolation, imagining it would become her sanctuary. In the mornings, Eleanor would sit by the bay window, sunlight spilling over her like a golden quilt, and scribble on yellowed pages. But the words never stayed. They escaped her like fleeting whispers, always out of reach. By afternoon, frustration would take hold and she'd retreat to the woods, walking for hours among the towering oaks, their gnarled roots mirroring her tangled thoughts. It was during one of these walks that she met him, a man whose name she would never learn, whose face seemed carved from the shadows of the forest. He had a voice like a low hum, soothing and unsettling all at once. He asked her why she walked alone, and she laughed, saying she preferred the company of trees to people. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes, a sadness she couldn't quite place. The trees, he said, remember what we forget. Eleanor didn't understand, but she found herself drawn to him. They began meeting in the woods, day after day. He never revealed much about himself, but he listened. Oh, how he listened. She poured out her soul to him, the stories she wanted to write, the fears that kept her pen still, the loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. He would listen quietly, then offer a word or two, always cryptic, always leaving her with more questions than answers. "Do you ever wonder," he asked one evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, "if stories can rewrite themselves?" One night, Eleanor had a dream. She was walking through the woods, but they were different, alive in a way she couldn't describe. The trees seemed to pulse with light, their branches whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. And there, at the center of it all, stood the man, his shadow stretching long and dark. "Come closer," he beckoned, and though fear coiled in her chest, she obeyed. As she reached him, he held out a single piece of paper. It It was her handwriting, unmistakable, but the words, they weren't hers. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Year's story," he replied. "The one you haven't written yet." She woke with a start, the memory of the dream clinging to her like cobwebs. The next day she rushed to her desk, determined to write. For the first time, the words flowed. They came as if from somewhere deep within her, or perhaps from somewhere else entirely. Days turned into weeks, and Eleanor barely slept, consumed by the story pouring out of her. The man stopped appearing in the woods. She searched for him, calling out into the trees, but the forest remained silent. Months later, Eleanor finished her book. It was unlike anything she'd ever imagined writing. Dark, haunting, yet beautiful in its sorrow. She sent it to a publisher, and to her astonishment, it was accepted. The book became a sensation. Critics called it a masterpiece. Readers were captivated by its depth, its raw emotion, its chilling familiarity. But Eleanor couldn't celebrate. The story had come at a cost. She felt hollow, as if she poured too much of herself onto those pages. And then strange things began to happen. Late at night, she would hear whispers in the house, soft and indistinct, like the murmur of leaves. She started seeing shadows that didn't belong, fleeting movements at the edge of her vision. And always, she felt as though she were being watched. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating silence, she returned to the woods. She walked to the spot where she had first met the man, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching for her. And then she saw him. He stood in the clearing, just as he had before, but his face, it was different. The sadness was gone, replaced by something darker. He held her book in his hands, its cover shimmering in the moonlight. "You wrote it," he said, his voice no longer a hum, but a whisper that crawled under her skin. "What are you?" she demanded, fear choking her words. "I told you," he replied, stepping closer. "The trees remember what we forget." He opened the book, and as he did, the woods came alive. The trees trembled, their branches groaning like old bones. And Eleanor began to fade. She looked down at her hands, her body dissolving into wisps of smoke, her voice trapped in a scream that would never be heard. The man closed the book, tucking it under his arm, and walked away. Behind him, the woods fell silent once more. They say if you walk through the woods of Elmwood on a quiet night, you can hear her voice, carried on the wind, calling out from between the trees. And if you find an old book lying in the leaves, don't pick it up, because some stories were never meant to be told. Close your eyes, love. Let the rain outside your window blend with the static hum of this old radio. Can you hear it? The faint crackle, like secrets trapped in copper wires. Good. Now imagine a lighthouse, not the postcard kind, but one crumbling at the edge of the world, its bones groaning with every gust of salt-stained wind. Its keeper is a woman named Alara, whose hands smell of kerosene and heartache. She talks to the shadows. They never answer. Until tonight. Tonight the storm doesn't roar, it whispers. And and in that whisper she hears a name she hasn't spoken in a decade. Leora. Alara's routine is etched in solitude. Trim the wick, polish the lens, watch the beacon slice through the dark. But the lighthouse hides more than rust and rot. In its belly lies a room no one enters, a nursery frozen in time. Tiny shoes, a music box with a chipped ballerina, a crib draped in cobwebs. Years ago, her twin sister Leora vanished here, swallowed by the sea during a storm eerily like tonight's. The townsfolk blamed Alara. You were the older one, they hissed. Why didn't you hold her tighter? Alara's punishment was the lighthouse. Keep the light alive, they said, so no one else drowns in your neglect. But the light doesn't save. It judges. Every night, its beam carves her silhouette onto the waves, a lonely sentinel, forever reaching for a sister she couldn't keep. The radio crackles a weather warning. Category 4, evacuate. Alara ignores it. She's done taking orders. But then, a whimper, high-pitched, familiar, from the nursery. Her pulse thrums as she climbs the stairs, each step a drumbeat of dread. The door creaks open. There, in the crib, a child's shadow flickering like candle smoke. Leora. The shadow stretches, elongates, until it's no longer a child but a woman, her own face mirrored. You left me, it rasps, but I never left you. Alara stumbles back. The shadow follows, its voice syrupy with venom. You turned the light off that night. You wanted me gone. No, Alara chokes. The storm knocked the generator out. I tried to fix it. The shadow laughs, a sound like breaking glass. Liar, you were jealous. Mother loved me more. The truth slithers out. That night, Alara was the one who wandered into the storm. Leora ran after her. When the waves came, it was Leora who clung to the rocks, screaming Alara's name. But Alara, trembling in the lighthouse, pretended not to hear. She let her sister drown. The shadow isn't Leora. It's Alara's guilt, given teeth by decades of solitude. The lighthouse shudders. The beacon flickers. The shadow lunges. But Alara does something she's never dared. She turns off the light. Darkness swallows the tower. The shadow screams, then dissolves into salt mist. When dawn comes, the storm is gone. So is the nursery. The townsfolk arrive baffled. Why would the keeper abandon her post? But Alara sits on the cliffs, a smile on her lips. For the first time, she hears the sea clearly, and in its depths a voice. I forgive you. So sleep, darling. And if you wake to a flicker in the dark, don't fear it. Some lights aren't meant to guide. They're meant to burn, until we're brave enough to let them go. A music box winds down, then silence.